Welcome back, everybody. John Aravosis here to the Aravosis Report, here to talk today about Ukraine. And yes, we're going to talk about Bakhmut. I saw somebody mentioning on YouTube. Let me get the TikTokers going and we'll get rolling here. Introduce yourselves as always, folks, while we're waiting for people to join in. And here come the TikTokers. TikTokers. Anyway, what's going on? It's Tuesday, January 10th. Anybody who's new, we usually take a minute just to give folks a chance to arrive. So that is what we are doing. Hey, Hobitober. These names, your guys' names crack me up. You're ninth. Oh, don't give me that again. Too much memory. I cleared out the memory. Oh, TikTok's giving me weird memory messages again. All right. Ooh, Caden, thank you for that. Ooh, that was very generous of you. Thank you. Somebody just got a really cool gift on TikTok. Thank you for the heart there. We'll wait another minute, like I said, for the TikTokers to arrive, and if you're a few more of the YouTubers, etc. Glasgow. I've got to get up to northern Scotland at some point. Thank you, Andrew, for that. I've been to whatchamacallit, Edinburgh, but have not been further north. I'd love to get further north. Oop. Let me see here. Well, sorry. Anyway, hey guys, Montreal, another place I haven't been to and I really need to get to. Oh, hey guys, I'm going to start in a quick second here. Let's see here. Interesting. I'll put up Otanbot's quick report there for folks on YouTube to see. Yes, I did get a haircut. All right, guys, quick hello. I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. Thanks for joining us today. This is my daily show, nightly, in fact, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S., where I talk about the latest news from Ukraine. The way the show works, about the first half hour or so, I cover the news, and then the second half, I take your guys' questions on TikTok, which is over here on my iPad. You guys submit questions via the Q&A link that is in my profile. For the rest of you, obviously, you can use the comment box at the bottom of the screen. I always like to remind folks that I do this for free. I'm doing it full time since the war broke out. So I appreciate your support with the gifts, with the super chat questions, with stuff like that. It actually does pay the bills and helps me keep going. So please keep it going. You guys have been amazing. Let's dive right in here. So the big story, well, there's a lot of big stories today, actually. I've got a lot of news today. I was very surprised. Maybe the big story of the day, is what's going on with the town of Soledar in eastern Ukraine. So you probably are familiar that there's been a lot of fighting going on in eastern Ukraine, okay? And actually, I'd say the most intense fighting right now in the war is eastern Ukraine. It is around the town of Bakmut. I will show you here. It is a town, a Ukrainian town occupied by the Ukrainians that the Russians have been trying to take. Bakhmut is more or less where the tip of my finger is here, east of Kramatorsk, sort of southwest of Severodonetsk. So, thank you, Benji, for the llama there. So you can see that's where it is. Russia is all the way over here. Occupied Ukraine is all of this. So it's right there. Now, the Russians have been going kind of crazy trying to take Bakhmut for about 6 months now. I don't want to give too much of a sort of explanation here of it, but the hang on here, very fuzzy. Okay, you know what? I'm going to reboot the video on TikTok or whatever it is for you guys on YouTube. Excuse me, all right, YouTubers. I'm Okay, YouTubers, let's see if the video is any better. I hope it is. So I was just explaining Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine, okay? So the Russians have been going nuts for about 6 months now trying to get this town. It's not entirely clear why. The town just isn't that, I mean, the town is important enough. It's not that important. But at this point, it is thought that the Russians could have lost 5,000 men. We're talking 5,000 Russian troops killed trying to take this town of Bakhmut that just doesn't matter enough to waste that many men and to lose that much equipment. Nonetheless, the Russians have been doing this. They've been going after the town. The latest news today is it looks like the Russians may have occupied the northeastern suburb, northeastern suburb of Bakhmut that's called Soledar. And the latest reports, the British Ministry of Defense says that the Russians are in control of most of the town. There's some disagreement from the defense sources I've been reading online. For example, the Russians put out images claiming that they were in some of the salt mines surrounding the area there. Who knows, right? So there's a little bit of a fog of war issue. Thank you, Ali, for that. But nonetheless, according to at least British defense, it looks like the Russians did what was expected, which is they were probably going to get this town. Now, a little more detail on this, which is interesting. In terms of the Russian tactics, listen to this. This is from the New York Times today. Now, the group that has been leading the fight in Bakhmut and Soledar is the Wagner mercenary group. Mercenaries are soldiers for hire. And there is a Russian oligarch, a Russian billionaire named Prigozhin, and he created his own private army, and he's using them all over the world. The Mali government has hired them, and he is also using them in Ukraine, of course, with the consent and the request of Putin himself, of course. And these guys are bloodthirsty murderers, basically. But listen to this. Listen to this. So the Wagner Group, this is from the New York Times, the mercenary organization that has been central to Russia's efforts in the area of Bakhmut, has essentially been using recruited Russian prisoners as cannon fodder, according to a senior U.S. military official. The recruited prisoners essentially take the brunt of the Ukrainian response, while the group's more seasoned fighters move in behind them to claim the ground. So what we knew here as of several months now was that Wagner Group, in order to get more men, has been going to Russian prisons, and Putin told them, tell these guys, if you sign up for at least 6 months to fight for us, we will expunge your record. Well, in other words, you'll get a pardon, right? So you'll be able to go back into society if you survive. Well, around 35 to 40,000 of the Wagner Group's men in Ukraine, 35 to 40,000 of the men of the 50,000 total are prisoners, are Russian prisoners. Well, they are apparently in Bakhmut, in the area there in the east, taking these Russian prisoners and just throwing them at the Ukrainians and just letting them get shot and killed in mass, and then hoping that they at least take out some of the Ukrainians, and then the seasoned Wagner troops come in after them, after these guys in front of me. Literally the definition of cannon fodder, right? The Russians throwing their own men to be killed. I mean, it's insane, right? Absolutely. Somebody just said Operation Human Shield from South Park. I have not seen it, but loving South Park, I can only imagine. No, it's absolutely horrific what they're doing. The New York Times also says, this is interesting. The New York Times then goes into a little bit on why. Why have the Russians been trying to get Bakhmut in the east when the town just isn't that important? Listen to this. While the area is still highly contested, many have asked how a tiny city with a pre-war population of 10,000 people became such a focus. They're talking about the town of Soledar here now, which is the suburb of Bakhmut that it looks like the Russians may have captured today. The most critical factor is perhaps not what Russian forces hope to gain in Soledar, but rather what a mercenary group fighting on the front there has to gain in terms of reputation if it manages to seize the city. This is something I raised yesterday, and it's insane. Russia has been fighting a war, I mean, not just the war in Ukraine, but fighting in eastern Ukraine, trying to take the town of Bakhmut, and now more specifically trying to take this suburb of Bakhmut, not because it's strategically important, not because it will help Russia execute the war that it was worth losing 5,000 men over, right? Russian soldiers. They're executing this specific attack against this town in this region because the guy in charge of the mercenaries, the Russian oligarch, the Russian billionaire who's a friend with Putin, wants to impress Putin. He wants to impress the Russian people, and he wants to help himself get more contracts in the future, right? He's running a mercenary army. It's literally a private army. and the Russian Ministry of Defense is paying him and paying his men. He's executing this attack not because it matters strategically, but because it matters for his business strategically. I mean, that's how screwed up things are in terms of Russian decision making. Now, moving on from there at the moment, there's a lot of updates today in terms of NATO weapons going to Ukraine, which is great. I'm going to give you a lot of little updates, but they're all really good. Per Politico, the U.S. may be sending Stryker armored combat vehicles to Ukraine. They are basically troop transports. They're not as good as a tank. They're not as good against a tank as the Bradley fighting vehicles. You'll note that the Bradley fighting vehicles are the infantry fighting vehicles that the U.S. has now said we're going to send, I believe it's 50 of them over to Ukraine, at least 50 as a first installment. And the Bradleys are very good at attacking tanks and taking tanks down. These Strykers are not as good at taking down tanks, but they are much better at troop transport in that you can fit 9 soldiers inside a Stryker armored combat vehicle. You can only fit 6 inside a Bradley. It also, another good thing they were saying is that the Stryker does, however, offer better protection for the troops than a Humvee does. So basically, from what I was able to glean today, they're used to transport troops, to the front and other places and give them at least some protection, in essence. Ukraine already operates a similar vehicle, the Canadian Armored Combat Support Vehicle, a Canadian version of the Stryker built by General Dynamics, which started to arrive in Ukraine in recent weeks. In terms of the Patriot missiles, you will recall that the U.S. announced a couple of weeks ago that we are going to be sending a Patriot missile battery, one Patriot missile system to Ukraine. The Germans are going to send another, at least those will be the first 2 that go. Each Patriot missile system requires about 90 to 100 troops operating it, which is kind of an amazing number. I mean, it's a lot of troops. The Ukrainian soldiers are going to be heading to Fort Sill in Oklahoma to begin their training shortly. Let me see here. Just to remind you guys, the surface-to-air, the Patriot is a surface-to-air guided missile defense that can take down aircraft, cruise missiles, and shorter-range ballistic missiles. The training usually takes several months, but the U.S. said that they are hoping to condense the training to a much shorter period of time, because they don't want these Ukrainian troops to be out of the country too long, but also the Ukrainians have shown such a facility for learning how to use our weapons, new weapons so effectively that they're hoping it'll be a shorter period of time. Just a quick reminder, I am John Aravosis. You are watching the Aravosis Report. This is my nightly show here at 6 p.m. Eastern Time U.S., Monday to Friday, where I talk about the latest news from Ukraine. And then the second half of the show, I take your guys' questions and we get into a larger discussion about the news of the day in terms of Ukraine. Please do keep the gifts coming on YouTube and TikTok. I do work for free, and your guys' gifts help keep me going, paying the bills, in fact. So thank you for that. I also have a Patreon set up. Anybody who's been following me for a while, if you want to help out, please go check out my Patreon at patreon.com/Aravosis. And you can, set up a $5 a month donation, something like that. You can find my Patreon and all of my links on TikTok via the Linktree link that is in my profile. The rest of you can just go to aravosis.com and all my links will come up there. Now, let's continue. Per Sky News, Sweden, somebody mentioned this last night. Actually, I believe it was a Swede watching us last night who mentioned, and they were correct, that Sweden is set to transfer the self-propelled artillery system to Ukraine in an effort to push back Russian troops, the foreign minister has said. The wheeled system is built to keep pace with fast-moving land forces and delivers superior mobility. Latvia is going to be sending more Stinger anti-aircraft missiles to Ukraine. Canada is going to buy a NASAMS missile defense system for Ukraine. It was just announced. It is a ground-based anti-aircraft and anti-missile system. They're made in Norway with American components. Ukraine has received its first NASAMS in November, which is good because it also means that they already know how to operate them. And thank you very much for that, Brendy. That was incredibly generous of you. Thank you. let me keep going here. German Foreign Minister Baerbock visited Kharkiv in northeastern Ukraine today and pledged to send more aid. Just to show you on the handy dandy map, Kharkiv is right up here by the Russian border in northeastern Ukraine. This is all Russia here. So you can, I mean, literally Kharkiv is something like 20 miles or so from the Russian border. So it's right there. What else we got here? Oh, yeah. So the Russian artillery fighter, there was a report today. I'm forgetting where this is from. I believe this might have been Politico, but the report itself came from a U.S. government official saying that Russian artillery fire is down 75%, from an average of 20,000 rounds of artillery fired per day, now down to 5,000 rounds of artillery fired per day. That's a big drop, obviously, a 75% drop. Now, the question remains, and the experts aren't really sure, whether this is indicative of A, the Russians running out of ammunition, right? That it's getting a little more scarce, so they're having to be careful and ration it. B, the Russians aren't running out of ammunition right now, but they are afraid possibly of running out sometime in the future when they're really going to need it. In other words, either the Russians are planning a big offensive in the next few months and they're saving up their ammunition, or B, they think the Ukrainians are planning a big offensive in the next few months. And again, the Russians want to save their ammunition for that. Either way, it means if either of these is true, it would mean the Russians are not confident in their own supply lines. Otherwise, they wouldn't worry about using the ammunition now because they'd know they'd get more stuff in, say, April when spring hits. So probably it's a good sign. No matter what it is, it's an indication that the Russians probably don't think they have enough ammunition or they're worried about it. That's good. Obviously, it's good for Ukraine. Financial Times today had a really interesting story about China and Russia. Hang on, quick sip of water here. So, China has been a big ally of Russia in the war, kind of, sort of. China has not been providing weapons that we know of, but China has been a big defender publicly. China certainly has been sending the message to their own people, spreading the Russian propaganda within China. And what's interesting is the Financial Times, big business paper out of the UK, very respected paper. Financial Times is saying that they've spoken to a number of influential Chinese government officials over the last several months, and all of them are sending the message that the Chinese are basically not happy with the Russians. Now, mind you, this is possibly A, this could be true, what they're saying, or B, they're intentionally giving us a message, right? So it's possible the Chinese are sending us a message, and then the question becomes why. But listen to what they're saying. So what the Chinese officials are saying is they're not happy with the Russians. The Russians didn't tell them the truth when Putin met with Xi, the premier of China, back in, when did they meet? Late January, early February, I think. And we all believe, and maybe they still did, but we all believed that Putin told Xi, I'll hold off on my attack until after the Olympics. Remember, because China had the Olympics, and we believe that China didn't want the Russian invasion to basically overshadow the Olympic coverage, right? Well, the Chinese are saying, no. Putin said something about, and I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but I'm paraphrasing, I might have to take some action if the Ukrainians force me. That basically the Chinese are saying that they interpreted what Putin told Xi as meaning I might take a little military action. I might, go after some things, some territory in Ukraine, but I wouldn't try to take over the entire country. The Chinese were not happy. They felt blindsided that the Russians are trying to take over the entire country. The Chinese are not happy that the Russians appear to be losing. The Chinese basically have come to the conclusion that, in fact, the Russians are not going to win this. I see Sam Pierce just asked me as an aside on YouTube. I will be holding a Discord afterwards. On my Discord, we'll go afterwards and hang out for a little bit. It's discord.erevosis.com for sort of an after-party chat. So we definitely go there. Let me find here. The other thing with the Chinese, it was a really interesting story. So China's worried Russia's going to lose, basically, or not win. China is worried that Russia is going to... Now this one I think is especially interesting. China is worried that Russia is going to come out of the war weaker economically and politically. That politically, Russia is going to come out of the war as a minor power, and that economically, obviously economically and militarily, Russia is going to come out and be a weaker power as well. And basically, reading between the lines, the article basically is saying that China suddenly realized that it antagonized the entire West, which it needs for economic growth, and saddled itself to Russia, which is an economic basket case. It does not have a significant economy to start with, right? And militarily, they thought China was the number 2 or number 3 country, but now they thought Russia, but now they realize Russia isn't even in the top 3 of qualified militaries. So putting that together with the fact, and I'll wrap up with this, that China's worried about economic growth. Their economy has been growing much more slowly than usual. China for decades now, if you believe the numbers, now mind you, it's a closed economy. It's a communist economy. It's hard to get accurate economic data out of China, but the Chinese have claimed ever since I was in graduate school 30 years ago, China was getting 7% growth, 8% growth a year in their economy. That's an insane amount of growth. When our economy grows 4%, that's considered wow. And even 4% starts to get a little hot, meaning you run the risk of inflation and other stuff, right? The Chinese economy growing 7%, 8%. I believe in the last year, the Chinese economy was growing at like 3% or something, which isn't sustainable when you're a country of 1.5 billion people. And a lot of those people are still poor. China is not a rich country in terms of there's a lot of people who don't make a lot of money. So China needs, bottom line here, China needs a lot of economic growth to keep their economy going, to keep their growth going. When I say growth, I don't mean this like a tautology, but to keep basically the peasants, the working class growing economically, right? They need large growth. And they need to tie themselves to Europe to do that. And they feel like they've lost their relationship with Europe. Final point, because of the war with Russia, final point, the Chinese are worried that they've pushed Europe and America together. And they did. Let's face it. Donald Trump did a really good job of cleaving the relationship, cutting it between Europe and America. Trump was even talking about leaving NATO. And Biden comes in, the war happens, and what happens? Biden wanted to repair the relationship with Europe, but the war forced us to repair that relationship, right? It forced us to work together and see that Europe and America, that strategically and defense-wise, there is still a lot to be had, a lot of benefit to be had. That isn't great from a Chinese perspective. So that's why, all in all, China doesn't seem very happy with Russia and with where the war is going. Quick reset here. I am John and then a few more news stories. Thank you, Ellen, for those. I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. This is my nightly show, Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S., where I talk about the latest news from Ukraine, and then I do your guys' questions. You can submit questions via the Q&A link in the profile on TikTok, via the question box at the bottom of the page. Please do keep the gifts coming on TikTok and YouTube. I do this for free, and your guys' gifts help basically pay the bills and keep me going. Literally, by you guys giving me gifts, I'm able to pay the bills and keep doing this. So thank you. As I always tell people, I would do it anyway. I'm not going to walk away from this, but it does help a lot when you guys keep the gifts coming. So thank you for that. I also have a store set up, store.aravosis.com, where we've got a lot of cool Ukrainian themed goods. So go check those out as well. Russian oil prices. This is an interesting story that I am looking forward to reading more about, because it was just sort of a blurb today, I think on it was on Bloomberg, that Russian oil prices are really down. Listen to this. Russia's flagship oil is selling at less than half international prices and way below a Group of 7 imposed cap following sanctions targeting the Kremlin's revenue. And it gave an exact number. I believe, thank you, Marcy, I believe the Russian price was something like $37 a barrel. Okay, 38. There we go. Dark Chef is saying 38. I got it right. $38 a barrel. The international price is $76 a barrel. Russia's getting half. That's not good. Now, add that, I did not throw this story on today, but I probably should have with this. There's another story out today that Russia is having the biggest budget deficit since the Soviet Union era in terms of its budget. revenues have gone down. And what they think is going on, listen to this from Bloomberg. On December 5th, the European Union all but halted seaborne crude imports, so oil imported by sea, by tankers, by sea, killing what was historically Russia's top export market. So, that's a really interesting thing to consider here is Russia's top export market for the oil that is sent by tankers was Europe. Well, Russia started threatening Europe, and Europe turned around and went, well, you know what? Maybe we're just going to stop taking your oil altogether, which they did, which is amazing. Let me see here. A key driver of prices has probably been the lost European market because it put Russia at the mercy of a tiny pool of large buyers, most notably China and India. What they're saying here is that when the Russians lost Europe, they basically only had China and India left, two big buyers. And what happens? I mean, you don't have to be a sort of an economics expert to understand this, but if you sell your product to a lot of different people, you control the price. If you sell your product to only one person, he controls the price, or he at least does, because if that person walks away, you're toast, right? I mean, almost all of your product goes to one or two people. Those people potentially have a lot of power over you to say we're walking. Whereas so that's the danger of what happened when Europe cut off the oil to Russia before Russia cut it off to Europe. Russia had to go to China and India, and China and India have had the power to basically push Russia's prices down to 50% of what they should be based on the market. Now, the final point to raise here is there's concern that Russia might turn around and cut its oil production. Again, simple economics. If you cut back on supply, prices go up, right? Think of what's been going on in our countries lately, right? We've had all of these shocks to the production system and logistics system and everything else of goods, and we end up. I mean, there's a number of reasons inflation goes up, but one of the reasons can be when there's fewer goods and the same number of people are trying to buy them, the price goes up. So Russia may try to cut back on its oil production to try to get oil prices up. Let me see. Only a couple more stories. No, one more story, actually. This is kind of an interesting story as well. So the Atlantic Council, thank you, Cheryl Moore, for the llama. The Atlantic Council did a survey of 167 experts, experts on foreign affairs, international relations, international economy, et cetera. And 40% of the experts predicted that Russia would break up internally, meaning fall apart as a country, by 2033, so in 10 years, because of revolution, civil war, political disintegration, or some other reason. Meanwhile, 46% of respondents expected Russia to either become a failed state in a decade or break up by 2033. I then went and pulled up, because we talked about a failed state the other day, which is actually kind of funny because somebody last week, I think it was, raised the issue of whether Russia was or could be a failed state. And we were getting into a whole discussion about it. So it's interesting that this survey came out. The definition of a failed state on Wikipedia is a failed state is a political body, usually meaning a government or something, that has disintegrated to a point where basic conditions and responsibilities of a sovereign government no longer function properly. So what it means is the typical things you expect when you think of a government, right? The very simple things, macroeconomic policy, interest rates, setting international trade, taxes, running basic infrastructure, electricity, right, water, that all of that starts to fall apart. But it also can be the country disintegrated into civil war, right? And in Russia, you got a lot of regions thrown together over 11 time zones, so there's that concern too. I just thought that was very interesting. Now, last point on this. Europeans were particularly pessimistic about Russia breaking up, with 49% of them predicting such an event. And I looked at the thing, and it was kind of, I say funny, but not funny. Of the experts they talked to, 8% predicted the US was going to break up in the next 10 years. Fortunately, it was only 8%. So, better than 40% for the Russians. All right, guys, let's jump to the part of the show where I take your guys' questions. Actually, it's pretty good. That was a lot of news. I'm surprised I got it in half an hour. On TikTok, you can submit the questions, like I said, via the Q&A link. it could be questions. I also don't mind your guys' take on the news, how the war is going. So you could always post your opinion as well, and I'm happy to read it if it's something decent. The rest of you obviously use the super chat questions, or not super chat. You can use regular chat questions as well. While we're waiting for people to join in, let me actually hang on a second. I was going to bring this up. Otan Bot had posted something right as the show was going. He says a Norwegian TV team was in Bakmut, which is the town in eastern Ukraine where all the heavy fighting's been going on today. About 10% of the population are holding on and have kept their faith in victory. They don't remember the last time the town had electricity. According to the reporter, there is little indication that Russia will be able to take the city. The city has strong defenses and is constantly receiving reinforcements. The city has become a national symbol of the resistance. Now, that is something, in fact, that I was reading today, is that even though it looks like the Russians are probably going to take the town of Soledar, which is a suburb of Bakhmut, they're not really any closer to taking Bakhmut. That it's not as though the concern is, Bakhmut is next. So again, kind of crazy. I mean, the Russians basically so far lost 5,000 men. 5,000 Russian troops killed to take a suburb of 10,000 people. But this is Russia. This is Russia. Interesting. Tired guy saying, just came across a video on HITC 7s. I'm going to say, is that like a local, I don't even know what that is, about how the sanctions are impacting football in Russia, meaning soccer, I'm assuming. Might be worth checking out. From what I've seen, it's been pretty interesting. Kelly Fons is saying this is why Ukraine has been so strong, by refusing the ride out of the country, meaning, by refusing the ride out of the country, right? The reference to Zelensky when Biden offered him at the beginning of the war and said, hey, we can get you out. We can get you out. America will secretly get you to freedom. And Zelensky said, I don't need a ride. I need, what was the exact quote? I don't need a ride. I need, did he say weapons? Was it weapons? I think he said. Help me out here, guys. The exact quote. I need ammo. I need ammo. Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, I don't need a ride. I need ammo. I mean, a great quote, right? It means football, not yeah. That's what I mean. Yeah, soccer. Ammo. Okay, great. So Kelly's saying by refusing the ride out of the country, Zelensky held the government together and procured political and material support for his army. Very much so. Oh, actually, one thing I was going to raise, which is interesting, is that I am really fascinated, and it's not just an academic question, as to why the NATO governments are now more interested in giving better weapons to Ukraine. Meaning, suddenly we're giving the Bradley fighting vehicles, which is great, but it got the French giving a similar vehicle, the Germans giving an absolutely similar vehicle, the Marder, and then the Americans giving the Bradleys. Like, why those suddenly happened. The Brits are now talking about giving tanks. The French and the Polish government, the Polish government and the French government are, according to a story yesterday I told you guys about, putting pressure on Germany to provide tanks to Ukraine, the German Leopard 2 tank. Thank you, Baxter, for those. What is interesting to me is why all of this is happening, right? And then we're talking about the Brits. Exactly. The Brits, I don't know that it's been confirmed exactly, but it looks like the Brits may be providing 10 Challenger 2 tanks to the Ukrainians. And even though it's only 10 tanks and the Ukrainians need several hundred, that would break a glass ceiling of sorts. Meaning, currently no one wants to give tanks to Ukraine. Thank you, nothing for you for that. And everyone's been saying, the Germans in particular are saying, well, we're not going to provide those kind of things until somebody else does. We're not going to be the first. So the thought is that the Brits might be providing tanks, if they do, in order to put pressure on the Germans to say, okay, you said you didn't want to be first, now you'll be second, right? What worries me a little bit is why the Americans and the Brits and why everyone is getting a little more gung-ho on giving Ukraine these weapons. I don't think it's simply because the Ukrainians can win. I think we've known for a while now that the Ukrainians could win this war with the right weapons. I worry a little bit, just in the back of my head, I'm a little bit worried as to whether behind the scenes there's some concern. Thanks, Ben. I see. I'll get to your question next. Whether behind the scenes there's some concern about what's coming up next, that the Russians really are planning a major offensive, that the Ukrainians really are running out of equipment, meaning the Ukrainians have Soviet-era tanks, and whether the tanks have been destroyed. I believe the Czech Republic, I think, has been fixing a bunch of them, and they're sending some back right now. But they're running out of Soviet artillery, right? So they're going to need a new system, and a system that has a new tank, that has ample gunpowder and ample ammunition. That would be a NATO system. That would be specifically Germans tank, that a number of countries across Europe use the German tank, and there's lots of ammunition for it. There's a ton of ammunition for it. But what worries me is whether the countries are slowly coming around because they're getting worried. And they're getting worried that that maybe the balance of power is shifting more towards Russia. Even though we're hearing so much, and it's true, about how well Ukraine's doing. I'm just putting this out there. I think Ukraine is doing well, but it worries me a little what is finally motivating all these cynics to give better weapons to Ukraine. And I don't think it's just Ukraine's proving it can do it, because we've known for months Ukraine can do it, right? Just throwing it out there. All right, I see Ben. Thank you, Ben. Very generous of you. Saw on Sky News that the Russian Secretary of the Security Council, oh yeah, is that Patrushev or whatever, saying today, thank you, Alex, for the for the lava, saying today that Russia was fighting all of NATO, specifically Britain and the US. Do you think this is an attempt to dissuade more military support for Ukraine? There's one very obvious thing. Russia is, and this is, they said the Russians did a lot of stuff. There was more nuclear war talk today too, just, from Russian TV and all the, typical losers. But in terms of NATO, I think it's an excuse to the Russian people of why Russia's not doing well, right? Why, by the way, why Russia's going to need another mobilization, why they're going to need another draft of even more people, right? They haven't announced it yet. But if you're trying to convince your people that, hey, this war is a lot harder than we thought it would be, hey, we're going to have a much bigger draft and take your boys and your husbands, right, and your sons and your whatever, to war, you better have a good explanation. And the best explanation they can come up with is, well, we thought we were invading Ukraine, but then NATO declared war, evil NATO, and especially those evil Americans. Now, one thing that does interest me is, I've been asking this for months now, and I don't know if my friend Marion is here, who's like my local Russia expert, but why the Russians keep mentioning Britain? I get the America thing, right? Because America was historically the enemy, right? NATO was the enemy, but it was America, right? They always tried to put that division between America and Europe, and the Americans were the evil enemy of Russia and all this kind of stuff, right? So I get why they'd be demonizing America, but why do they always throw Britain in? That's the thing I don't get. And I may now possibly because the Brits are another, I always say, one of the major powers, right? Britain is one of the major powers of Europe in terms of military, right? And Britain has been, I think, the most outspoken of the major powers, right? You've had other countries that have been just as good about Ukraine as Britain, Poland, the Baltic states. But in terms of the top military powers, I think Britain has been the biggest. I think, the biggest defender of Ukraine, promoter. So maybe that's it. But it's very strange to me. So I think clearly they're trying to suck up to the American people. Not the American people. They're trying to, they love it. I love it. They hate us. Exactly. No, they really do. But they're trying to suck up to their own people and say, well, NATO. Now, I will say this. I think the Russians, and I've said this before, I think they're making a mistake. Nobody wants to hear, well, the reason we're not doing as well is because we're fighting them, right? Because then you're saying, oh, you mean so they're better than us, right? The Russian people aren't stupid. They know, well, okay, sure. NATO's providing a lot of weapons to Ukraine, but the Russian people know they're not actually fighting NATO. We don't have NATO troops on the ground, right? It's not like Russia is literally at war with NATO and we're bombing Russia and all of this, right? So the idea that Russia isn't doing well because NATO is involved suggests that NATO is better than Russia, and that if NATO really got involved, Russia would be in real trouble. Now, this is actually correct. That there's two big reasons Russia's losing this war. One, because Ukraine kicks butt, but I mean that sincerely, right? The West had been training the troops in Afghanistan and the troops in Iraq for 20 years. Didn't get us very far. The Ukrainians training for 8 years, the Ukrainians are just that good. Secondly, the Western aid for Ukraine has made a big difference. The weapons have helped a lot, but also helping support the Ukrainian economy, obviously. I mean, so they're not wrong, but it's still, I don't know. You get what I'm saying? I just find it to be very negative to say, well, hey, I'd be winning if I wasn't fighting that guy. Well, so you're admitting that guy's better than you. And I'm not sure Russian people want to hear that NATO is better than Russia. Anyway, that's what I think is going on. I think it's actually, well, okay, I'm sorry. Let me put a final thing. Clearly at the beginning of the war, to answer Ben's question, at the beginning of the war, NATO was really freaked out about, we don't want to make this seem like it's a war between, I'm doing my Biden whisper, we don't want to make it seem like it's a war between NATO and Russia. It's Ukraine, it's not America, right? And we were all very worried about that. I'm not entirely sure why we were worried about that, because, you know what I mean? Like, who cares? I mean, we're trying to win over the hearts and minds of the Russian people? I don't think so, right? I mean, we tried that for a very long time. We tried it with the Soviets, and we tried it with the Russians for 30 years. Didn't get us real far. So I just personally never understood the idea of, I mean, we're not at war with Russia, but if Russia wants to say this is a battle in part of NATO versus Russia, it is. I mean, we've taken sides. Our weapons are killing Russian soldiers. I mean, how do you deny that, right? I mean, and I don't really care that Russia tries to spin it. Let them spin it however they want, right? To me, all that matters is we help Ukraine wins, and Russia ends up chastened with a worse off military so that they're able to do less damage to us and the rest of the world when this war is over, right? And Ukraine wins. I don't care how they frame it. I don't know. I don't really get it. Anyway, thank you for that, Ben. Sky Queen. I think we are giving better weapons, meaning we are now giving better weapons to Ukraine because our governments are tired of this, and perhaps we figured out we aren't in danger after all, maybe. I think so. I think that's part of it. There is clearly an element of all of that worry about, for example, the nuclear war worry. I think that's kind of gone, right? I think the rest of our governments, first of all, you notice the way it kind of subsided, right? Like we had that situation 2 or 3 months ago, maybe 3 months ago even, where the Western government, like Biden and the Western government, spoke out and they warned the Russians about using nuclear weapons and all of that, right? And then suddenly that's kind of drifted away. And now no one talks. I mean, the Russian TV last night talked about, we need to nuke France. That would teach NATO a lesson. And if we nuked France, nothing would happen. NATO wouldn't do anything. And it was just, you're listening to this going, are you people out of your minds? Like, listen to these. But the point is that I think NATO isn't freaking out about Russia's nukes anymore because we finally realize Russia isn't going to use them, so that the Russians feel like, well, we better talk about them some more. Let me put it this way. That's part of the calculus. Yes. If you're a NATO government, or actually NATO collectively, let's face it, because nobody in NATO is totally doing stuff on their own. Although the French kind of did last week. France, I was mentioning this yesterday. I was reading a report that it looks like the French came out early and announced that they were giving their what is it, fighting vehicle, whatever it is, we told this, was it the AX-10 or whatever it is? I forget. It's a letters and numbers kind of name for it, that the French came out and did it because they wanted to put pressure on the Americans and the Germans to do the same. And that's why France did it. And it worked. The next day, the US and Germany both came out and said, okay, we're going to provide our own infantry fighting vehicles. So, anyway, but there you go. But yeah, I think it's a combination of things, including the fact that on balance, we realize it's not as dangerous anymore. that, not to mention, actually, by the way, too, every time we've upped the ante and given better weapons, right? Remember HIMARS? HIMARS was going to be the big threat. Ooh, we better not give HIMARS. If we give HIMARS, oh boy, what will Russia do? Russia didn't do anything, right? Then we announced we were giving, then we gave Stinger, early on we gave Stingers, didn't matter, right? Then we gave HIMARS, didn't matter. Then we gave NASAMS in November, didn't matter. Now we're giving Bradleys, didn't matter. I mean, when I say didn't matter, I mean, the Russians didn't go crazy, right? Oh, they're going to nuke us. They didn't nuke us, right? Yeah, they're dropping bombs on Ukraine. They're dropping bombs anyway. It's not like they're dropping more bombs. Are they committing more genocide? But I do think, like, to some degree, it's becoming clear that we can up our military provisions, and it's not, the only difference it's making is it's helping Ukraine, which is a good thing. Nancy Wax, thank you for the super sticker. Let me see here. So I'm looking to see about other questions here, and then I will go to my TikTok. I mean, that's the interesting question. PB&J is asking, would Putin resort to chemical weapons, and will the world step up? That's the AMX-10. Okay, I was close. That's the interesting question, because I do worry. Okay, we know the Russians could use chemical weapons. They could use biological weapons, not just nukes. I worry because I think that I am convinced nuclear weapons have their own stigma. And the idea of somebody using a nuclear weapon for the first time since World War II would bring unholy hell down on Russia from the world order, but also especially from NATO and the United States. We wouldn't have any choice. What worries me is that if they were to use chemical or biological weapons, it would be really bad. But just Judy Wu just said, chemical weapons were already used in Syria, and it was horrific. And the world saw, and the world didn't do too much, right? I mean, we all saw the videos of young children who were dying, and horrific deaths from these kind of weapons, horrific. And we all saw it. And what happened as a result, right? What worries me is, in general, nukes are perceived as being a whole other level of weapon. How dare you use a nuclear weapon, even though obviously chemical weapons are bad and horrible and crimes against humanity, but nukes, oh my God. So I don't think we wouldn't. I think we would, but I do think we would respond. I think he uses chemical weapons, and potentially you have just as strong. I know I'm not talking phosphorus. I'm talking like they did in Syria, where you literally take out an entire town, right? And thousands, if not tens of thousands of people, right? Something like that happens, and I hope, but I believe you will probably see a very, very strong NATO reaction, even though it might be one step down from what we would do if they use nuclear weapons. Let me pull up the TikTok questions. Q&A TikTok. Yeah, what about Russia bringing in the hypersonic missile? Yeah, Russia was, driving around today on the off of Norway with a boat that allegedly had its hypersonic missile on it. And it's a missile that allegedly, and I say allegedly because nobody knows if it even works. But allegedly, this missile goes like 10 times, what was it? 5 times the speed of sound and 10 times faster than any other missile, something like that, right? And it makes it, if it works, it would make it next to impossible to shoot down because it's going so fast. 7 times, whatever. I care. But I don't care, right? Because first of all, I couldn't care less about Russia using it against us, right? Russia uses it against us, and then we're at war. And if we're at war, a conventional war, NATO wins. A nuclear war, everybody loses. So the war would, in principle, stay conventional. And if it stays conventional, we win. So Russia has one weapon that's really fast. So what, right? They could use it in Ukraine, but first of all, you'll notice they're not using it in Ukraine. They're flying it. They're driving it around the Atlantic, trying to scare everybody. And right now they're off of Norway and they're trying to scare Norway. But again, Norway's a member of NATO. Thank you, Zoe, for the hat. Norway is a member of NATO. I'm not worried about the Russians attacking Norway. What are they going to do, right? Attack Norway, and they're going to have 32, actually, with Finland and Sweden any day now. They're going to have 32 countries attacking them, and we're going to win. So that's how I think about the Russian. I think in a great arms race kind of way, we care about the hypersonic missile because we want our weapons to be as good as or better than their weapons in case a war ever happens. But thank you for those. Who was that? Arabella. Thank you, Arabella. But the fact that they're trying to scare the Norwegians and they're not using them in Ukraine makes me think A, they don't work, or B, they have like one of them. And they can't use it because what's the point, right? So, yeah, I'm not too worried about it. Sarah Bradshaw. Do you think it's the perception of Syria to the world being less favorable than the world perception of Ukraine being more favorable? Possibly, yeah. I mean, Sarah, I think what Sarah's saying is she's getting at the issue of why Putin or the Syrians or whomever was able to use chemical weapons in Syria. And I mean, like I said, horrific use of chemical weapons in Syria. I mean, it was bad. I mean, the pictures of children and stuff that were killed. And why Syria sort of got away with it, but why in Ukraine? Well, and actually, this is the larger question, right? Which people are saying, which is, and by the way, not what Sarah is saying, but there was a Russian talking point early on in the war, and you would see a lot of the Russian trolls bringing it up on TikTok, especially. Nobody cares about the Palestinians, only the Ukrainians. Nobody, and it was insert your pet grievance here. Nobody cares about the Syrians, and it was trying to basically create more division, whatever it was. It's complicated. I mean, Syria, the perception of the Middle East is that the Middle East is a basket case. Okay. I think by most people in the world. I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying if you're talking about why the population in general of countries, they look at the Middle East and they say the Middle East, more wars, more fighting, more death. Every day is more death and destruction in the Middle East. And you grow used to it. Doesn't mean it's good, but whereas the chemical weapons were pretty freaking bad. I mean, that one still kind of bothers me, but I still think you get into this, it's somewhere else. Ukraine isn't somewhere else. Ukraine is Europe, right? I mean, my family's from Greece. You look at Greece, you look at Ukraine. By the way, I never even really appreciated how close Ukraine was to Greece because I just never paid attention. But looking at the map, I was like, holy crap, like that's really close, right? I mean, Ukraine is the back door of where my family is from. It's a European country. They look like us. They don't look like all of us. I mean, they look like me, right? But they look like a lot of us. So we look at it. Now, having said that, Syrians look like a lot of us too. So I don't want to get too far with that, but I don't feel a connection to Syrians in the way I do to Ukrainians because the Ukrainians are Europeans and I'm, first generation American. So I have for me personally, I've got a connection there. You also get into the strategic issue, right? Unfortunately, governments, and I had talked about this at the beginning of the war. We talked about this once. Governments have to do what is in the best interest of their own country first. Okay. Absolutely. I think human rights should play a role in governments. And what I mean is human rights internationally should play a role in what a government does. But you've got to if you're going to get involved, you've got to make sure that you can make a difference, that you have the ability to make a difference, and you will. In other words, getting involved in fighting, you actually, for example, if you're going to declare war, you better be able to win the war, and you better have a plan to win the war and to end the war so it doesn't go on for 20 years, right? And even if you're going to go in and try to stop a genocide, there's no point in trying to stop a genocide that you can't stop, right? Whereas something like Ukraine, you can. Syria, I guess part of the problem with Syria might be, what the hell do we do? I mean, I don't really know enough militarily about Syria, but I don't know whether people felt that it wasn't even clear what we all could do with Syria. I don't know. It's hard. I mean, hey, Auntie Deb. I mean, part of what's hard is and this is something that I found working in the media all these years and also being an activist, because as an activist on a lot of civil rights issues, I was always trying to pitch stories to media. Not every story would work, and it wasn't always clear what story would work. Right? When you're pitching a story to the media, some stories reporters are interested in, some they're not. Some stories the public is interested in, some they're not. And I'm talking domestic American stories. And I would pitch stories and the media would cover them and the story would explode. I'd pitch other stories, the media would cover them and the public wouldn't care. And so there's a very a black box almost, as well as to why sometimes the world rallies and sometimes they don't, you know? But I mean, again, Ukraine, I'm a little surprised the world rallied for Ukraine as well, frankly. I mean, I was telling before the war started, I saw a Ukrainian woman in the park who we met, and she was asking me, you know, because she's new here, and said, you know, do you think America would get involved and invade and help us? And I said, there's no way America is sending troops. There's no way. And she said, why? And I said, because it's not in America's strategic interest. You know, Taiwan is clearly a strategic interest. Ukraine, not as much. But look what happened. Ukraine caught on, right? I mean, I was back in Chicago again this last month. And again, driving around town, local churches in my Chicago suburb that had Ukrainian flags up. I mean, for some crazy reason, this story, and I mean, you almost need a psychologist to figure out as well. This story just touched people, and I don't know why. I mean, I'm glad, but I don't entirely know why. So there you go. What else we got here? Yeah, so Sasha gets treats, exactly. Let me pull up another TikTok question here. Did Ukrainians sink another Russian ship? I did not see a glimpse of it on Yahoo News. I didn't see anything. Did anybody see anything today about Ukrainians sinking another Russian ship today, or news of it at least coming out today? Let's see if anybody mentions it, but I didn't see anything. Although there may be a rumor out, you know what I mean? Like maybe they don't, maybe we don't know yet. Does the war have to come to a complete end before rebuilding Ukraine can begin? Maybe. I mean, the problem becomes, how do you rebuild Ukraine if the Russians keep blowing things up, right? How do you rebuild the infrastructure, the water, the electricity? How do you know what I mean? Like I don't know. I'm not sure you can. I mean, you can do some things, but I don't know. I'm not sure you can. Hey, Ryan, glad to see you. That's true. Now, Zelensky, actually, Kelly raises a good point too, actually. Kelly Fons is saying, speaking for myself, I fell in love with the Ukrainian president and people and the narrative they began, and stay tuned in to see how it ends. Yeah, I mean, Zelensky, right? Zelensky made this very personal. He made it. He was what's the word I'm looking for? A figure that you like, right? You looked at him and you went, I like that guy, right? Something about him was sincere. It was likable, and you felt for him. And then we saw these images of the Ukrainian people that we liked. And then we saw the relatable. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. Relatable, Kimber. So you absolutely had Zelensky made a big difference in terms of regular people like us looking at this and saying, I care about these people. You also had the Ukrainian people themselves. Remember all the stuff they were doing with social media and everything else? I'm trying to remember now. We'd almost have to go back and look at the beginning of the war. You know, I mean, the problem is there's so much stuff now, but for somebody to go back to the beginning of the war and look at all the news we were getting and the images and everything else, don't know. So a little bit more. Oh, it's 7:00. I'm going to do one or two more, and then we're going to pop over to, we will pop over to the Discord. Let me look one more here. That's a really interesting question. Once Ukraine has a Patriot missile battery operational, where will it be positioned? So from my military friends I talked to, thank you, Ben Haliski, the Patriot missile battery you've got to keep in mind it's not the kind of thing that protects. It's not like it's an umbrella protecting an entire city. It doesn't work that way. The way my friends were explaining it to me is it's more the kind of thing you would use to protect a high value target. For example, if, and the Russians don't seem to be doing this, but if you thought the Russians were trying to blow up the Ukrainian parliament or the Ukrainian presidency. Thank you, Hector, for that. You would use it in America. I think we actually do have one. I'm pretty sure we do actually. Well, first of all, I know we've got Patriot missiles defending Washington, and I will guarantee you we probably got at least one defending the White House, one defending Congress, et cetera, right? Probably two, by the way, not one. So they would usually be to defend high value targets like the White House, like the Congress. So I don't know what it would be used for, but it would be for a couple things to start with. Some small, they've only got two they're getting anyway, one from the Germans and one from us. But I think we have one on the White House. Okay. But then the issue from there would be, thank you, by the way, for that. Who was that? Hazel. Thank you, Hazel, for the gem gun. I suspect we're waiting to see how it goes. We're waiting to see how the training goes because it's up to 100 men per system to operate it, to maintain it, et cetera. We want to see how well the Ukrainians use it. They've got to integrate it with the rest of their defense system, right? Because, and again, I'll finish with this point. My military friend was explaining to me that, the Ukrainians already have a pretty good system for shooting down incoming drones, incoming missiles, right? We know they're shooting down most of the drones, most of the missiles, but some keep getting through. Well, you've got to have a system in place where the existing Ukrainian missile system, which is S-300s and other things, is now tied in with the Patriots. And let's say some Russia starts firing something at Ukraine. The system is able to analyze, what did Russia send? What is Russia sending? Is it just a drone? Is it a cruise missile with a really big bomb, right? So like, what's the threat that they're sending? What is it being fired at? Like, even if it's a big bomb, do we really care if a big bomb is going at an empty warehouse versus a big bomb going at the Congress building, the Parliament building, right? So this system, the Ukrainian air defense system, has got to integrate the Patriots, the existing anti-aircraft, anti-missile system the Ukrainians have. And then that system has to be able to look and say, aha, it's a big cruise missile. We want the Patriot to fire. Oh, it's an S-300 missile. We just want our S-300 to fire, right? But for it to be able to talk and figure it out like that, you've got to have these systems talking to each other. It's complicated. I suspect it's the kind of thing we're going to help the Ukrainians set up, but the Ukrainians are probably themselves very good at. But my guess is we're going to see how that works. And if it works really well, we're going to give them even more systems. I hope to God we give them more systems, because one or two isn't enough. All right, let me do a quick recap of the news. I always like to end the show, or at least usually, with a quick recitation of the stories we covered today. In case you guys missed any and came late, at least you can kind of see what we've got, what we were talking about. So we talked about Soledar, which is a town in eastern Ukraine, a suburb of Bakhmut, which it looks like the Russians may have captured. Per Politico, the U.S. is considering sending Stryker armored combat vehicles to Ukraine. Hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers are heading to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to begin training on the Patriot missile systems. Sweden is set to transfer the self-propelled Archer artillery system to Ukraine. Latvia is going to be sending more Stinger missiles to Ukraine. Canada will buy a NASAMS missile defense system and send it to Ukraine. The German foreign minister was just in Ukraine today and pledged to send more aid. Of course, the problem in Germany isn't the foreign minister. The foreign minister is good. The problem is the German chancellor, but that's a whole other story. Russian artillery fire is down 75% per the United States, from 20,000 artillery shells a day to 5,000. China is reportedly unhappy with Russia in that the war did not go as well as China was hoping, and China is now a little worried that it needs to have a better relationship with Europe in order to help buck up China's economy going forward. Russian oil prices are down significantly per an article in Bloomberg today, which is good, obviously, to cut off some of the money to Russia. And finally, the Atlantic Council did a survey of 167 experts, asked about the future of Russia, and 40% of the experts predicted Russia will break apart by 2033 into a bunch of smaller countries. All right, guys, thank you. We could go over to Discord again. Why not? We'll go to my Discord, discord.aravosis.com, and we'll hang out for a little bit tonight. Last night got a little long. We hung out for an hour. Wasn't the intent, but we did. But I'll go hang out a little bit. If you go over to the Discord, go to the left-hand column, go all the way down, look for John's after show or after party, and you'll see us there. Also, I have currently, I've got auction up on the Discord. I'm auctioning off one of the Ukrainian bracelets made by the Ukrainian government. And these are the last ones. They sold out. They're done. There are no more. I've got a number of them that we're auctioning off. They're made from steel from the Azovstal steel plant where the 2,000 Ukrainian defenders were fighting off the 14,000 Russian troops for 2 months. And they've made bracelets. They're really cool. And we're auctioning them off. Half the proceeds go to humanitarian aid in Ukraine. Half the proceeds are going to help continue supporting my work because, as I've said, I am doing this for free and I am doing it full time. So trying to keep the money coming so I can keep the work going. So join us maybe over on the Discord. Otherwise, tomorrow night, Wednesday night, I will be back here. Thank you, Hazel, for the gift on TikTok. I'll be back here tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern Time US. So join us there if you don't make it on the Discord right now. All right, guys. Thank you all. I will get going. And like I said, maybe join us on the Discord for a little bit. And then I'm throwing on a pizza. Most likely. That will be next. We can talk about the Biden. Yeah, we'll talk about the Biden document thing. Why not? That sounds like a good, it's sometimes fun to have a topic of discussion. The CNN reported today that they did find some classified documents in Biden's office after he was vice president. I think it was his private office, but whatever. But Biden did have some classified documents. So it raises an interesting issue about Trump, et cetera, and we can talk about that. So feel free to head on over. All right, guys, thank you so much. Thank you, moderators, as always. Thank you for the gifts. Thank you less so for the trolls, but the trolls always are amusing, and I do like to be amused. So, all right, guys, thank you on YouTube and Twitch and everybody else, and I will see you guys over on Discord